Good evening and welcome to a two-part not a documentary, reading called The Ultimate Christmas Wishlist. What if you could get what you're really hoping for, by Rico Tice. Now, what would you like for Christmas? I find that a difficult question to answer, but I know I do need to answer it. Otherwise, it'll turn out like the year I was presented with a gift that, on unwrapping it, turned out to be a dog bowl, which would have been great if I'd happened to own a dog. Rico Tice is founder of Christianity Explored Ministries and is senior associate minister at a church in London, and is the author of several books. Now, I intend to read, it's in 5 chapters, I intend to read the first 3 tonight, and the last 2, plus what next. What next tomorrow night, I suppose. So, I'll be reading about 42 pages tonight, and I shall be reading about 21 pages tomorrow night. Now, the Bible used in this is taken from the NIV, which is the 2011 version, which is better than the 1970s, 1984 version, which personally I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. But the 2011 version, which is a little more modern, is better, shall we say. So I'm going to stick with that version. So, beginning with chapter 1, what would you like for Christmas? And that is the first line, as well as the title of the chapter. And we've already read this bit, but I find that a difficult question to answer. But I know I do need to answer it, otherwise it'll turn out like the year I was presented with a gift that, on unwrapping it, turned out to be a dog bowl, which would have been great if I'd happened to own a dog. That's the author. It's not that there's nothing I want for Christmas. The problem is with what I would like, for 2 reasons. Sometimes the thing I'd like is beyond the budget of the person who's asking. I'd like a trip to the World Cup. I'd like a top-of-the-range golf club. I'd like a new right knee. Other times it's not just beyond their budget but their power. I'd like inner confidence that means I'm not knocked back by criticism and don't respond like an enraged teenager. I'd like a sense of hope for my struggling friend. I'd like peace in places like Afghanistan at the time, and protection for a friend of mine who works there. This was published in 2022. Of course, we need peace in other places in the world, such as Ukraine and Israel, Palestine and Syria, places like that. And there are others. I'd like a guarantee that my children will grow up to enjoy holy, happy and purposeful lives. I'd like to lose 30 pounds in weight, I suppose. I'd like to lose more than that. It's hard to say which is least likely to happen. But just imagine for a moment that time, budget and ability were no barrier. What would be on your ultimate Christmas wish list? Think big. Get beyond the boxes and the socks, the books and the pyjamas, the bubble bath and the handkerchiefs. You can have anything you want. What would you look for? I guess your answer will vary according to your circumstances. All of us have things at the back of our minds that we try to push to the bottom of our hearts. I've never met anyone who would finish the sentence, "If I could change one thing about my life, it'd be," with the word nothing. For all that there is to be excited and happy about at Christmas time, the parties and the people and the food and the films, that's never the whole story. There are things we feel sad or scared or sorry about, and the presents under the tree are not going to address those. Maybe, if your aunt pointedly gives your uncle a how-to book on home improvement again, they might even make them worse. And so what you would most like for Christmas and what you actually get for Christmas are usually two very different things. For me, it will be socks and a book, not the World Cup trip or peace in Afghanistan. And that's okay. After all, you can't wrap up hope or peace or purpose or confidence and make a gift of them. No, no one can deliver those. Except that someone did, and they did it at Christmas. The arrival of joy. At the very first Christmas, so the story goes, an angel made an announcement to some very ordinary, nondescript shepherds. This is what the angel said in the book of Luke, chapter 2, verse 10, the Gospel of Luke, as I should say. I bring you good news that will cause great joy. The first Christmas was about something that brought great joy. Not polite smiles like when I unwrapped that dog bowl, or a disappointed sigh, as may well happen this year, when my wife opens my very best effort at a thoughtful, useful gift to her. No. The first Christmas was about the arrival of something that really did bring great joy. This wasn't a joy that relied on everything in life being great. Actually, it was a joy that broke into lives that were not going well. Those shepherds and the other people who experienced the events of the first Christmas were living in poverty and under oppression. They were subject to Roman rule, and although when we think of the Romans we might think of straight roads and warm baths, for first-century non-Roman people their presence mainly meant sharp swords and high taxes. Things must have seemed pretty dark. Yet, still, the joy broke through. Still, these events made a difference. Here was a joy that could change even the darkest of times. What was the source of this joy? I bring you good news that will cause a great joy, the angel said, because, in Luke 2 verse 12, you will find a babe wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. You're probably familiar with this story. Mary, Joseph, manger, shepherds, angels, wise men, baby Jesus in the manger. Children acted out every year. But somehow it's easy to end up enjoying Christmas after Christmas without ever appreciating the story's depth, its real meaning. That in the middle of the nativity scene lay a baby who brought joy, who came to give us the things that we are all looking for. The birth of Jesus means this, that at Christmas and in life you can have what you would most like: hope, peace, purpose, confidence. The aim of this book is to help you find out how. Light in the dark. In the next 4 chapters we're going to look at those 4 themes, seeing who Jesus was, what he did, and what difference that makes to us. First, though, we need to rewind, not 2,000 years to the very first Christmas, but even further back in time to 7 centuries before Mary ever fell pregnant. At that time, the people living in Judah, a little country on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, were facing an enemy as bad as, if not worse, than the Romans. Judah was facing catastrophe, invasion from the all-powerful Assyrian army. Try to imagine being in Kabul with the Taliban approaching. That's the kind of fear the people would have felt. Or perhaps in Kiev, with the Russians approaching for modern purposes. The Assyrians were unstoppable. They were already marching through Israel, the country to Judah's north, and Judah would be next. What did the people of Judah need for Christmas? They needed peace, protection, rescue. Into this moment of darkness came a message from a man who claimed to be a spokesman of God, a prophet. This man, Isaiah, was completely realistic about the dark situation Judah faced, but he had not given up hope. In Isaiah 9 verse 2, we read, "The people walking in darkness," he said, "have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness a light has dawned." And how would this light come? Isaiah 9 verse 6, "Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." Here is Isaiah's solution, and what he claims is God's solution to the darkness facing Judah: a child, a baby boy. That's it. This is like Winston Churchill going on the radio in June 1940, when the British Army was retreating from Dunkirk and Britain faced invasion and defeat by Germany, and saying, "Don't worry, victory is secure. Hope is here. I've heard that a woman is pregnant and she will have a son." This gift that Isaiah was announcing could not have sounded less like what the people needed. They were facing an invasion from a huge, unstoppable army. They were going to be given a tiny baby. That's a gift that would surely have prompted a disappointed sigh at best, and more likely it would be a head-in-hands moment. The Assyrians are coming, and the answer is, a little child? But then Isaiah told them who this baby would be. "To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Isaiah 9 verse 6. Isaiah was promising the events of the first Christmas. He was describing who it was that would lie in the manger. Someone was coming who would do far more than bring rescue from an Assyrian invader, though God did also supply that. And you can look up how that happened in the Old Testament book of Isaiah chapter 37, verses 36 to 38. The British Museum in London also has some depictions from the period of these invasions. Someone was coming who would give people what they truly wanted, were working for, were dreaming about: hope, peace, purpose, confidence. You can get what you'd really like. You're probably used to hearing about the baby Jesus at Christmas, but we need to recover the shock of who this baby was and why he was born. The claim of the Bible is that the one whose birth the angel announced and whose identity Isaiah described is still, even all these years later, all anyone needs to ask for. The Bible is realistic about life, that there are as many things that take joy as give it, that the things we most want out of life often elude us. But the Bible is also very clear about where to find the things we most want and need. They can be found in the baby who was born at the first Christmas, the boy who was the mighty God, the Prince of Peace, the everlasting Father, and the wonderful Counselor. I don't expect you to believe that just because I say it. In fact, please don't believe it just because I say it. Instead, I'd love you to spend some time with me, the author, in the next few chapters, looking at some of the evidence for that claim. We're going to focus not on the baby Jesus, but the adult Jesus, because as for all of us, his birth was only the beginning. We'll see how Jesus grew up to say he was, and show he was, the mighty God, the Prince of Peace, the everlasting Father, and the wonderful Counselor. And as we do so, you can consider for yourself who Jesus is. You can see how, if he is who he claims to be, the ultimate Christmas wish list, the hope, the peace, the purpose, and the confidence that we're all searching for is wrapped up in him. Here's the claim, that in Jesus you get what you would really like in life, that this Christmas, in a profound and lasting way, what you most need and what you actually get can be the same thing. Could it be true? Well, let's check chapter 2, Hope. For me, it's always been when the lights and decorations go up in the shops. That's when I get excited about Christmas. Other people complain about commercialisation when the shops get Christmassy in October, but the author loves it. I see the decorations go up and I start to look forward. Christmas is coming. That feeling of looking forward to something good, something better, is what we usually call hope. And there are few emotions more powerful. When you have hope, even if your life remains the same for now, you go about your day smiling inside. It changes you. Hope gives you an expectation that the future is worth working for and worth waiting for, even if, like Christmas Day when you're a child, that future seems to come very, very slowly. Hope drives us until it disappoints us. We all know what it's like to have our hopes dashed. It's the sinking feeling when the Christmas present that you've saved up for and planned carefully turns out to be out of stock and unavailable till the first Monday in January. More seriously, it's the gut punch you experience when the application gets rejected, or the person you really like tells you that they're just not into you, or the sale falls through, or the test results come back and all your happy daydreams dissolve in a moment. Perhaps you know how it feels when you do get what you've been dreaming of, only to find that it's not all you thought it would be. You finally get the job or the relationship or the retirement that you've been hoping for, and it just doesn't deliver the satisfaction it promised. Sometimes Christmas is like that. I remember one year ages ago when my mum, who managed to organise everything and everyone through December while also working very hard as a nurse, got to Christmas Day, was spoken to unkindly by a relative and told me that evening, "What was said just ruined the day for me." She worked so hard to make Christmas wonderful, and then it wasn't. And when our hopes are disappointed, we tend to set our sights on something else, and the whole cycle starts over again. But sometimes we get knocked down too low for too long, and we end up with no hope at all. And we're just left with the feeling that there's nothing to look forward to. To have hope is to feel happy, not in a fleeting way, but in a lasting one. It's a wonderful gift, but for hope to be worth having, it needs to deliver what it promises. There's no point in spending your life hoping for something that never arrives, or that disappoints, or that fades. Many people are more aware of this at Christmas than any other time of year. I don't just mean not getting the gifts you wanted. Christmas can also provide a bitter reminder that this year didn't deliver what you'd hoped for, and that next year might not either. December can be the best of times, but it can also be the worst of times. Sadly, finding real hope, hope that lasts, hope that comes true, proves elusive to many of us. But it is this kind of real hope that the Christian faith claims that Jesus offers. What are you hoping in and hoping for? Perhaps so far in life all your hopes have been fulfilled, or perhaps they've been shattered. More likely you've experienced a bit of both. But whoever you are, whatever you've experienced in the past and whatever your life is like in the present, Christianity is an invitation to put your hope in a future that is better than anything else you could imagine, and more certain than any other promise you could hear. To show you the kind of hope that Jesus was born to bring, I want to take you back to a single day in Jesus' adult life. We're going to look briefly at 3 snapshots from that one day, as told to us in one of the 4 Gospels or historical biographies in the Bible. The one we're focusing on here was written by a man called Luke, a doctor, who interviewed eyewitnesses of what Jesus said and did, and wrote it up in around AD 60, well within living memory of the events he describes. Storm on the sea. The first incident takes place on the Lake of Galilee in northern Israel, a lake so big it's often called a sea. Luke 8 verses 22 to 25, where we read, "One day Jesus said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side of the lake.' So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Master, Master, we're going to drown.' He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." Imagine the desperation of Jesus' friends, the disciples, as their routine boat trip turns into a life-threatening emergency. This is not just your average storm. In fact, it's more like a hurricane, caused by cold air from the mountains meeting the warm air around the Sea of Galilee and producing a typhoon-like weather system on the surface of the water. When woken up to be faced with the horrors of this hurricane, what does Jesus do? He stands up and says, "Quiet, be still." And it is. Here is a man with the power to control the uncontrollable. A man who can take a hopeless situation and turn it around completely. The wind and the waves don't have ears, and yet when Jesus speaks, he can calm them. So the disciples are left asking the right question. Who is this? Who can do something like that? What category do you put him in? If he can calm a storm with a word, he's clearly not simply a teacher or a philosopher or a healer. Who is he? This matters to us because it's not just about seas and storms and fishing boats. It's about the things that keep you awake at night because they're out of your control, the question marks that cloud your future, the hard things that threaten to overwhelm you. Wouldn't it be amazing news if there was someone with the power to control those things? It wouldn't make hard things easy, but it would be deeply reassuring if we could know that behind the universe stands someone who is running the show and working things out. The kind of someone, in fact, that Isaiah promised when he spoke about the baby who would be born at the first Christmas when he called him Mighty God. I wonder if those words were circling in the disciples' minds as they asked each other, "Who is this? Could this man be the promised mighty God walking on the earth? He had created and commanded it with his words." Terror on the beach. Maybe, though, the disciples might have thought that the calming of the storm was a stroke of luck, a happy coincidence, a one-off. So let's look at a second snapshot from that day. As the boat reaches the shore, Jesus and his friends set foot on land. There they are confronted by someone for whom hope has vanished, and the thought of happiness is little more than a bad joke. Just to warn you, this part is not very warm and Christmassy. Luke 8 verses 27 to 29. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. I wonder what you make of this idea of demon possession. Is there really such a thing? Surely that's an idea from another era, a less enlightened age. To that I would say, what about the idea of evil? Is there such a thing as that? Perhaps we should ask the family of Sarah Everard, the London woman who was murdered in 2021 by an off-duty policeman pretending to carry out policing duties, or the families of all the women who have been murdered, even just in London, since then. Read some newspapers next time someone does something truly awful, and you'll easily observe that some acts are so bad that evil really is the only word that fits them. But then we can't help but ask the unsettling question of where evil comes from. Is it just a case of bad choices or bad education or bad parenting? The reality is that every day we all experience impulses inside us and influences around us that drag us down. Maybe not into what we would call evil, but certainly into harshness, meanness, and even cruelty. And the Bible says that there's a spiritual being who stands behind and ignites those impulses and influences. He's called the devil, and his foot soldiers are demons. They hate God. They hate good. They hate joy. They are opposed to human happiness. This man on the beach is a picture of their great desire to bring misery. They've driven him outside of society and away from those who love him, so that he's alone among the tombs. His life is utterly miserable. There's no doubt about it. He is a victim of true evil. Everyone responds to what I've just said about evil and the devil in one of two ways, because there are only two things we can do with this. One is to deny the devil is real and to live as though what you see is all there is. But when it becomes hard to explain the reality of evil when we see it at its worst, the other response is to be deeply afraid of it. If you know there's evil and that it's more powerful than you will live in fear of it. Denial or fear. Those are the two responses to the reality of evil until Jesus shows up. Jesus doesn't deny evil and he isn't afraid of evil. Instead, he removes it. In Luke 8 verses 30 to 35. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. The man who started that day alone, broken and distressed, and heading for the same fate as those pigs, ends up sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. This man who has been beyond hope gets a happy ending. He can return to his family and friends. He's restored, whole and happy, and all because he's had an encounter with Jesus. Who is Jesus? Could we be looking at the mighty God who has come to earth with the power to defeat evil? And still Jesus' day isn't done. Grief in the town. Nothing robs us of joy like the grief of losing the people we love. The presence of grief means that happiness can never be undiluted. Even on our best days, even on Christmas Day, there'll always be a feeling of, oh, if only X had been here to enjoy this. In the next scene, Jesus meets the most desperate grief. As he leaves the beach and walks into the nearest town, he meets a local dignitary. In Luke 8 verses 41 to 42. A man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Jairus is about to lose his beloved daughter, and there's nothing he can do. He knows his wife will never quite smile in the same way again, and neither will he. He's heard this man has miraculous powers, so he throws himself at Jesus' feet and he begs for help. Jesus says he'll come, and they set out for Jairus' house together. But there's a delay on the way, and before they can reach the sickbed of the dying girl, Jairus hears the horrific words that every parent dreads. In Luke 8 verse 49. Someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." It's a punch in the stomach. All Jairus' worst nightmares have come true, but then Jesus speaks in Luke 8 verse 50. "Don't be afraid. Just believe and she will be healed." Just believe? She will be healed? This is a big claim, a serious claim. When someone's lost a child, you don't play games with the parents. The stakes are high now. Jesus had better be able to deliver. Luke 8 verses 51 to 53. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. This is a contemptuous laugh of disbelief at what has just been said. Who do you think you are? She's dead. Don't dangle this false hope in front of these poor parents. But it's not false hope. Luke 8 verses 54 to 55. Jesus took her by the hand and said, My child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Jesus can raise a child from death just as easily as you or I might rouse a child from sleep. He has the authority to turn chaos into calm, the power to remove evil, and the ability to turn grief into joy. What category is big enough for him? Luke is showing us here and throughout his biography of Jesus that there's only one category big enough: mighty God. Out there and down here. I don't know if you believe there's a God out there. Many of us like to think that there is, or at the very least we like to think there's something more than our material universe, some bigger reality that makes sense of the story of life on earth. But have you ever said to yourself, if there is a God out there, it would be great if he proved it? In the life of Jesus, we see that God has, and Jesus doesn't only show us that is someone out there, he also shows us what kind of someone there is out there. There's a mighty God who gets involved in his creation, who's interested in the details of our lives and who cares about our joys and our tears. He cares about this world. That's why he came to it at the first Christmas. This means that we're right to hope for more, for better. If this is what God is like, if the Bible's description of him is true, then the reality is that we were actually made to enjoy a life without storms, without evil, and without death. And we can have that life. The Bible tells a unique story about where the world is heading. It says that one day the mighty God will come to earth again, and when he does, everything that he did on a local individual level 2,000 years ago, he will do on a global cosmic level. The calming of the storm, the rescuing of the man, and the raising of the girl are like a thumbnail preview of an entirely new world. A world where all the uncertainties will be brought under control. A world where evil will not intrude, and a world without sickness or grief or death. That is the world that deep down we're all longing for. It's what we glimpse in the best bits of the best Christmases. The laughter, the joy, the togetherness, and the rest. It's what we miss when December proves hard. But at the first Christmas, Jesus came to give us real hope. The knowledge that there will come a tomorrow when things are not just better but completely, flawlessly perfect. In one sense, having this hope changes nothing, and yet, at the same time, it changes everything. We may still experience darkness in this life, disappointment, divorce, depression, or disease, but we can travel through sadness without despair because with Jesus, the worst thing is never the last thing. There's always hope, and having this hope means that we can enjoy the good things, the smaller hopes, fun, food, family, fitness, friendships, falling in love, without that nagging fear of losing them someday, because we know that even sweeter days lie ahead. This is hope, real hope. This is what allows you to go about smiling inside, whatever your day brings. This is what the mighty God was born at the first Christmas to invite you to enjoy. And the final chapter for tonight, peace. It's possibly the most famous sports match of all time. On Christmas Day 1914, with the First World War a few months old, British and German soldiers on the front lines in France left their trenches, met up in the no-man's land between them, and had a kickabout with a football. The result is unrecorded, but rumours are that the Germans won on penalties. It was a glorious moment of peace in the midst of one of the most brutal wars ever fought. And that's why it's remembered. This brief interlude of friendship stands out because it was so abnormal and unexpected. Even as it happened, elsewhere along the line, the guns were firing and men were dying. Nothing of its kind happened on any of the other 3 Christmas days during the First World War. It hasn't happened since, either. Despite John Lennon declaring in his 1971 Christmas song that war is over, it actually wasn't, and it still really isn't. There hasn't been a Christmas day in this century or the last in which there has been peace all around the world. Humans often seem better at fighting than friendship. And yet still we long for peace. Still we imagine how great it would be, as Lennon did in another of his songs, to see all people living life in peace. From the song Imagine. Wouldn't it be wonderful this Christmas to see peace out there, an end to the conflicts and crises around the globe that have been all over the news for so much of the year? Wouldn't it be glorious if the guns really did fall silent and never started up again? Wouldn't it be wonderful if peace could be a reality in here too? While at one level we enjoy the anticipation of Christmas, many of us also long for a break from the stress that seems to accompany us through most of December as Christmas Day rushes towards us. Even in less busy months, we long for an end to the anxious soundtrack of thoughts that play in our mind like a record on repeat, or for a solution to the regrets and responsibilities that keep us awake at night. And wouldn't it be great if there could be peace between us in our relationships? I'm sure that, like mine, your circle of family and friends has been marred by relational strife over the years. It may be that you'll spend Christmas walking a diplomatic tightrope in order to keep family members from falling out, or struggling with the distance that has grown between you and a child or a parent or a friend. There's a reason why January is the busiest month for divorces. People spend a few days trying to get on with their nearest and no longer dearest, and by New Year they can't see a way to do it anymore. The absence of peace is so painful, its gaping silences and raised voices and lingering regrets, but the presence of peace, well, that's truly beautiful. Its wholeness and harmony, its completeness, tranquility, security, and safety. That's precisely the vision behind the Bible's word for peace, shalom. It paints a picture of a peace that is deeper and more far-reaching than the awkward ceasefires we often settle for. Shalom is not just, I get along with my neighbour, we don't hassle each other, and we leave each other to get on with our lives. That would be all right, but shalom is better. It's, I take delight in my neighbour. We so enjoy each other that we take down the fence between each other's gardens, we babysit each other's kids, we go for a walk together after Christmas lunch, and we spend Boxing Day together, and we love it. Is there any real hope of a world like that? A world of kickabouts instead of conflicts? Yes, but first we need to understand why peace so often eludes us. The problem in my journal. When I was a teenager, I kept a journal. I wrote it because I thought I was such a great guy that I owed it to humanity to record my life. The only problem was that week after week it showed that I was the opposite of great. I'd lament that there was a lack of world peace, but there was no evidence in my journal that I ever laid aside the weapons of malice and sarcasm myself. I'd say, wouldn't it be great if the starving were fed? And then I'd ask my parents for a bigger allowance, and I'd eat it. I'd mention wanting to do things with my sister's friends that would have horrified me if my friends had wanted to do them with my sister. Looking back on it, my journal reveals that there was a problem in my world, and that problem was me. This was probably already obvious to the people around me, but when I realised it, it was a real turning point. And this is not only my problem, it's the same for each one of us. Have you noticed that though we want to be at peace, we humans are the ones who spoil the peace? On a global level and on a personal level, wherever you have conflict, you'll find it was a human who started it. Why? Because while we all want peace, we also all want to be the ones to dictate the peace treaty. Deep down, we expect every relationship to be on our terms. Most of our frustrations, tensions and arguments with others arise at least in part because other people don't do what we want them to do. If we were to keep a journal, we'd find that there was a slogan for our lives. My life, my rules. I'm not saying we're all selfish and self-centered all of the time. We're capable of great generosity too. Even the teenage Rico, that's the author, had some good points. But in your more honest moments, you'll be aware that there's something inside you which means you are sometimes selfish or unthoughtful or even deliberately nasty. That's why we hurt even the people we love most, because something inside us is saying, my life, my rules. And that's why our hopes for peace are never totally fulfilled. But it gets worse. Choosing conflict. If you really want to understand what's wrong, you need to see that the problem is not just horizontal. It's not just broken peace out there, in here, and between us. The Bible's diagnosis of the root of the problem is vertical. We're saying, my life, my rules, to God, not just to each other. God made everything and sustains everything, so you might think we'd say, your world, your rules. But instead, people live as though God should abide by their rules and fit in with their plans. They choose conflict with him instead of peace with him. That attitude is what the Bible calls sin. And sin matters more than you might think, because it matters very greatly to God. Sin has consequences because God is a God of justice, and so he judges sin. This is good news when we are the victims of sin. God is not indifferent to justice. As we've seen, he does not run away from evil, and he does not wink at abuse. God cares. I've been the victim of real malice at a couple of points in my life, and I take comfort in knowing that injustice matters to God as much as it matters to me. If you have been the victim of sin, then you can know that God does care and God will do something about it. So God's justice is a comfort, but it is also a challenge, because the truth is that while some of us may be victims, all of us are rebels. There is no one who has never said, my life, my rules. What I do to you matters to God, and what you do to me matters to God, and how we treat the world matters to God. And so we face the consequences of our sin, the justice of God. Jesus himself pictured those consequences in terms of darkness. He spoke of a place beyond death, a place of darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, Matthew 8 verse 12. Imagine a life spent in constant darkness with no light whatsoever and no hope of ever having any. A life beyond death without hope or peace or purpose or confidence, and with only tears and regret for company. Jesus called that place hell. The Bible is very straight with us. If we turn our backs on the Lord of light, we'll find ourselves left in the dark. God will hand us over to the consequences that our conflict with him and our treatment of others deserves. But there is hope. Remember Isaiah's promise. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and he will be called Mighty God, Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9 verses 2 and 6. If you want to find peace with God now and forever, Jesus is the place to look. Although when he lived on earth, it didn't seem like that. 3 steps to paradise. For a Prince of Peace, Jesus really did make a lot of people angry. The religious and political rulers of the day had a problem with him because he didn't fit in with their rules, their agenda, or their priorities. They saw Jesus as a threat to their power, and so they were determined to have him killed. They conspired with the Roman government to have Jesus arrested in secret, condemned in a sham trial, and executed in public. The charge, claiming to be God. The sentence, death by crucifixion, an absolutely brutal method of capital punishment. And so the one who was laid in a wooden manger when he was born was now nailed to a wooden cross to die. But he wasn't the only one facing execution that day. Luke 23 verses 32 to 33 and 39 to 43. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with Jesus to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Today you will be with me in paradise. When you think about it, that's an outrageous offer. This criminal is under the sentence of death. He's most likely a murderer and a terrorist. He's been cast out of society and nailed up on a cross to slowly suffocate to death. Yet what does Jesus promise him? A place of peace. That's what the word paradise is getting at. It implies harmony, wholeness, and tranquility. How can one dying man look across at another dying man and make such a promise? In the verses leading up to that peace offer, there are 3 key moments. Think of them as 3 steps to paradise. Step 1 is in verses 41 to 42. "Don't you fear God," the criminal says. "We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve." He doesn't say, "I'm a victim." He doesn't say, "I'm innocent." It's as if the journal of his life has been opened and his heart has been exposed. There's a problem in his world, and he knows that that problem is him. He says, "I deserve to be here. I'm being punished justly, not only by the arm of the state, but by the arm of God." He acknowledges his wrongdoing. I don't meet many people this honest about their own flaws, but I wish I did, because that's the first step. I don't know what you made of all the talk of sin and judgment earlier on in this chapter. I realise that our culture finds it unpalatable. But the thing is that Christianity will never make sense until you get to the point where you look at your wrongdoing and say, "Actually, I've been living with a my life, my rules attitude, and I deserve judgment." The other criminal mocked Jesus, but his sneering couldn't change the truth of what he'd done. Today, too, Western culture laughs at sin. "What does it matter?" we say. But this can't change the truth either. Our conflict with God is real, it's serious, and it's our fault. Admitting this is actually wonderfully freeing, because it means we're able to recognise who Jesus is and what we need from him. And this is step 2, recognising that Jesus is the King, the mighty God who has come to earth. That's what that criminal does. He sees that this man has done nothing wrong in verse 41, and then he says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom," verse 42. When he looks at Jesus, he doesn't see a desperate man at the end of his life, but a man who's in charge of a kingdom. He sees a king who can calm a storm, who can defeat evil, who can raise the dead, and who will come into his kingdom even though he is about to die. And so, and this is step 3, this dying man cries out to Jesus for rescue. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." The criminal doesn't just want Jesus to think of him fondly. "Remember me" means he wants Jesus to act for him. Think of a married couple. If one of them says, "Remember, darling, it's our anniversary next week," they're not expecting their partner merely to remember that fact, but to do something about it, to book the table or buy the flowers. This criminal sees that Jesus has a kingdom beyond death, and when Jesus gets there, the man wants Jesus to act for him. He asks Jesus to welcome him, a condemned criminal, into that place of peace. This criminal offers nothing, but he asks for everything. What does Jesus say in response? Well, he doesn't say, "Sorry, I can't help you." He doesn't say, "I'll tell you how you can save yourself. Live a decent life, say your prayers, love your neighbour, and go to church, and then you'll book your place in heaven." He doesn't say, "You decided to reject me and my rule in your life. You made your bed and now you'll lie in it." No. Jesus says, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. No conditions, no qualifications, no delays, just total acceptance, total forgiveness, and total peace with God. The criminal offers nothing, but he receives everything for free. Shattered. Yet while this forgiveness is free for the criminal, it isn't really free at all. It costs Jesus his life. Luke 23 verses 44 to 46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, for the sun stopped shining. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. This 3-hour period of total darkness in the middle of the day was not an eclipse. It was a supernatural sign, a sign of God's judgment against sin. Yet this judgment didn't fall on the people who deserved it. They didn't die in the darkness. Jesus did. In a world of conflict and rebellion, Jesus was the only person always to have kept the peace. If Jesus had kept a journal, you wouldn't find any wrongdoing in it. No rebellion against God, no selfishness towards other people, never a moment of grumbling or greed. Yet on the cross he experienced God's judgment. As Jesus hung there dying, God was handing him over to the consequences of other people's sin, of my sin. Jesus was paying for all the wrong I recorded in my journal. My sinful record had become his. And Jesus paid that price willingly so that he could offer peace. A few years ago, as I was cycling in London, my front wheel jammed between the bars of a road drain. The bike stopped dead. I flew over the handlebars and I hit the surface of the road head first. If I hadn't been wearing a helmet, I would probably have been killed, according to the doctor I saw afterwards. But I was wearing a helmet. It was smashed to pieces, but I just stood up. I was shaking, but basically fine. Because of the helmet, I was alive. Bicycle helmets are designed to absorb the energy of an impact so that it's not transmitted to your head. In order to absorb a serious impact, though, the internal structure of the helmet has to shatter. So when I crashed, my helmet was wrecked by the impact that otherwise would have killed me. And that is a small and inadequate picture of what Jesus did on the cross. Here was God himself taking his own judgment, bearing his own anger, taking into himself the darkness that should be mine. He was shattered so that I would be safe. And to finish, everything changes. The Prince of Peace was born at the first Christmas so he could die on the first Good Friday. We won't understand why Jesus came unless we understand why he died. He experienced the darkness of judgment so that the criminal next to him and anyone else who asks would not have to endure it, and so that he and we could instead enter into God's place of peace for eternity. Peace with God is what Jesus offered the criminal. Oh dear. And peace with God is what he continues to offer today. The steps to peace haven't changed. If we acknowledge our wrongdoing, accept Jesus as King, and ask him to rescue us, then we too can know peace. That's all we have to do, but we do have to do it. I mentioned earlier that a major turning point in my life was looking through my journal and realising that the problem in my life was me. It was a turning point because it was the first of those 3 steps to paradise. In the end, I took Jesus up on his offer. And when we do that, everything changes. It changes things in here, inside. Having peace with God means you can face the world with joy and confidence because you're at peace with the one who owns the place. When you mess up, you don't need to try to ignore it or seek to hide it or work to excuse it. You can be honest. This is wonderfully freeing. It changes things between us. God's Spirit gets to work in the lives of his people, repairing broken relationships and making friends out of enemies. Because we know how much we have been forgiven by God, we can learn to forgive others. We're able to say those two phrases that are so crucial to relational harmony. I'm sorry, I was wrong, and I forgive you. That won't always be easy. It won't always look perfect, and it will often take time. But God's peace does give us real hope for all our relationships. In most families, for Christmas to work, at least one person in the house has to be able to resist the temptation to explode, and then be able to forgive and to move on, and the Spirit works in people to enable them to do this. And one day there'll be peace out there. There's hope for our bitter and broken world. History is heading somewhere good. There will be a day when the Prince of Peace will restore the whole creation to a state of shalom, of real peace, fully and finally, and forever. All that is possible because Jesus. All that is possible because Jesus, the mighty God, is also the Prince of Peace. His death means that as we look at the journal of our lives and see the evidence of our sin, we can say to him with confidence, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And in return we can hear with comfort, I forgive you. You will be with me in paradise. And I hope to do in part 2, chapter 4, which is purpose. Chapter 5, confidence. And the last part, what next? So, I didn't think it would be quite so long, but that's the author's works, not mine. So, the end of part 1. May God bless you all. Amen.